Hi, I'm Michael Senoff, founder and CEO of HardToFindSeminars.com. For the last 5 years, I've interviewed the world's best business and marketing minds. Along the way, I've created a successful publishing business, all from home, from my two-car garage. When my first child was born, he was very sick, and it was then that I knew I had to have a business that I could operate from home. Now my challenge is to build the world's largest free resource for online downloadable MP3 audio business interviews. I knew I needed a site that contained strategies, solutions, and inside angles to help you live better, to save and make more money, to stay healthier, and to get more out of life. I've learned a lot in the last 5 years, and today I'm going to show you the skills you need to survive.
Most people, when they're in the shower in the morning, they think about income. They think about how they're going to generate revenue that day, that week, that month, to pay themselves and to pay their staff. And that's fine, and that's income. But what they really should be thinking about, and what completely differentiates a good businessman and a great businessman, is they should always be thinking not only about income, but also about equity. You see, you can carry on thinking about income, but at the end of the day, whether it's in 1 year, whether it's in 3 years, whether it's in 5 years, there will be a time when you want to sell your business, and there will be a big payday if it's been structured right. And so all the time they need to be thinking about how they can generate that big payday.
Hi, it's Michael Senoff with Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. You know, on my site I've got lots of interviews on how to buy a business and lots of interviews on how to grow an existing business. But here's one that will show you how to position your business best for sale. It's with a leading expert and recognized authority on how to sell your business. This interview is 45 minutes long. You're going to hear a wonderful story on how he's helping others sell their businesses for more. Get ready and enjoy. Take me back to the beginning. How did it all start with these assisted centers? Did you have a family member or something that you experienced it firsthand?
No. It goes back even further. It goes back to I used to be a financier, used to be a banker, basically, financier. And the company I worked for, we used to finance all different types of businesses. We used to finance retail businesses. We used to finance leisure, restaurants and clubs. We used to finance, obviously, assisted living centres, nursing homes, care homes, and investments. And so I did that for about 8 years. And so I got to see a whole range of different types of businesses. And I knew at some point I wanted to do my own thing. And so I chose to go into the assisted living centre market because there was great opportunity. Although I knew regulation was about to come into the marketplace, there was still enormous opportunity in terms of two things. One, there was enormous profits in it. And two, they were mainly what I call mom and pop businesses. And there was very little what I call professionalism and systems. Exactly.
Did you finance some of these?
Yeah. At that time I was working for a finance house, so yeah, we were financing them. But I was travelling all around the UK, seeing the good, the bad and the ugly, really. Not only in that sector, but in other sectors. But I made a decision that I wanted to get into that sector because I saw great opportunity. So in the end, myself, I bought one of the homes. I bought a home eventually, and then I bought a second home myself.
How many people could it occupy?
The first home I bought was registered for 30, and then the second home I bought a year later was for 28. And then at the same time I was looking around, these homes, even in those assisted living centres as you would call them, even in those days they were expensive to buy, they were capital intensive. So even in those days they were probably, in US terms, they were between $1 and $1.5 million, sometimes two, even in those days. So I had a choice. I'd got a couple of homes and I was doing okay, but I wanted to grow quicker. And so I looked around for someone with more money than me, and then I found an investor who was interested in getting into this sector, and rather than buying something, he wanted to start something up from scratch. So for about 1.5 years we negotiated a kind of a deal. They would put the money in, and I would guarantee them a return, and they would give me a stake of the company, and I would run it basically and give them the return. And so we had an idea that over 5 years we would get to 10 homes in 5 years, and we had kind of a plan, and that's roughly what we did.
I
I still had my other two centres as well, which were nothing to do with the group, and I still was running those businesses all the time. But with these investors, we created a group to build and create and develop and do something significant over, a relatively short period.
As a financer, you saw firsthand what made a good business. You had to look for strict things within the business that you could make a decision to loan this business money.
Correct, exactly.
Now, what were some of the big mistakes you were seeing when people came in and wanted money for their business?
The mistakes were, in England we have this expression, people were rose-tinted. You have that expression, rose-tinted. They see things through rose-tinted glasses. Yeah, exactly. So because you were going into a care industry, quite rightly, they wanted to care for the patients, for the residents, for their clients, but there was very little financial acumen involved. There was very little commercial kind of perspective. And so whilst they had good intentions, often that's all they were good intentions. And so there was no planning, there was no marketing, there was no systems. It was just totally ad hoc. And they will provide good care and the money will follow and everything will be fine. And sometimes that was true, but often it wasn't. When we were lending to people, we're lending to people who had obviously good intentions, but also had some kind of greater commercial perspective on the deal. So we knew we would get paid back as well. So in those days, it was really, as I said, it was mom and pop businesses. Often you used to find people who were qualified nurses would get fed up of working in the NHS and then they wanted to do their own thing, so they would go into and buy a care home of some description, but they had no idea of what it took to be self-employed and actually run a business.
Right. So you could see what the industry was doing, and you, coming from your background, knew you had to have an exit strategy because you had a financer. So what was it that you did that gave you this increased value when Deloitte & Touche evaluated? What are some of the things you did in your business that allowed you to sell it for top dollar?
There were many things. The first was building a team of people. I mean, that's the first point. You need to create and build a team, so the business wasn't exclusively dependent. I drove the business, but I had a team of people under me. I had managers, the directors, and I had a team that I trained them and I gave them the values, and the vision was emanated from myself. But that required a lot of training and supervision and time spent with a number of people over a period of time. So first you have to have a vision. I had a greater vision. I knew strategically, right at the very beginning, how I wanted the centres to be. So for example, one of the things were that all the centres were an hour from my house, so we weren't dotted all around the UK. We were reasonably local, and so it was relatively easy to manage. The second critical point was that the centres were the most expensive, and again that was done on purpose. So on average, people, if they choose a centre, they go and visit 3 centres. A relative, if their mum needs to go into a assisted living centre, into a care home, they on average go and visit 3, and so I wanted them to go and visit 3. I wanted us to be the most expensive. I didn't want to argue about price. I mean, we were obviously going to deliver greater value for that in terms of facilities, in terms of training, in terms of the care we provided, but I wasn't in a commodity business. I wanted to completely differentiate myself.
In the research you did, you knew that the market could sustain a premium price?
Yes, because it varied from locality to locality, but I knew that when I bought centres, I did obviously my research and checked that the market could bear a private, at more expensive rates. So that was also one of the reasons.
What did it cost, say, a couple per...
Well, for example, at the end, the average fee per week would be £300, $600. That would be kind of an industry norm. Yet our average fee was, in English, it was $374, so it would be times that by 2, so it's $740 or something of that description.
Per week?
Yeah, per week.
Did insurance cover any of this?
No. Essentially, the care market is split into 2 types of people. Either you're private, in which case it's not the insurance that pay, it's just people's assets pay. Either they've sold the house and they've got investments, or they've built up investments over the years, and those investments pay for the care. So those are the private payers, and then there's a rate which the government pay, which obviously is a really poor rate, and that varies from area to area, but there was often a big distinction between what a private person would pay and what a person from the state or from the government would pay.
You're listening to an exclusive interview found on Michael Senoff's Hard to Find Seminars Senoff.com. With the universal health care there, the government would take care of someone if they
couldn't afford it.
If they couldn't afford it.
Yeah, correct. The rule was if you had less than $40,000, the government would step in.
Was it subpar care?
No, care is care.
Care is care.
Care is care. The only thing where we would differentiate, so that if someone was paying $600 or $700 or $800, the only thing we would differentiate is on the facilities. So they would have better facilities in the room they had. They would have ensuite rooms. They had rooms. We had lovely gardens, so they would have rooms with a view and stuff like that. But care is care. You know, you can't differentiate. A carer will provide care to anyone, whether they're state-funded or whether they're private.
So you had a premium price. Did you justify that price to your clients, or?
Completely. We explained where people could afford it, you know, why we were most expensive. And like I said, because we invested enormous amounts in the facilities, so that a lot of the rooms and the general facilities, the kitchen facilities, the bathroom facilities, their own facilities were of extremely high standard. A lot of our centres had wonderful gardens, so again, people could look at that. And also, another significant thing is, in everything we did, we always beat the industry average. So, for example, the government said that your staff had to be at least either 25% qualified or 50% qualified in some way. So whenever there was a number, we always beat that number. So, for example, if it was 50%, we were always at 75 or 80 or 90%. Or if it was at 25%, we were always at 50% or 60%. So we were always beating every number in the industry.
You were doing this for a reason, all for that exit strategy?
Totally, because that's how you run a business. So, for example, there's always 2 or 3 key numbers to any industry. So in the assisted living centre, there's 2 key numbers. The first number is, are you filling your beds? What's your occupancy rate? How are you filling your beds? And the industry average at that time was 89.3%, whereas our occupancy, our statistic was in excess of 97% year on year, not just 1 year, year on year. So we were completely beating the industry statistic by, you know, considerable margin every year.
All right, now, hold on, let me interrupt. Let's take you back to your financer.
Yeah.
And you see that number. What does that mean playing the banker's hat? When you see a stat like that and you see you're above average, what does that mean to you?
The industry norm is fine, and, you know, there are those below industry norm, in which case those are those businesses that have difficulty. And then there's those that are at or close to the industry norm, and those businesses are ticking along and paying the bank back, and they're earning reasonable money. But that's okay. As I said right at the very beginning, I wanted to completely differentiate the business that I was associated with, and I wanted to completely make it stand out, make it marketable, completely differentiate myself. So I knew whatever the industry stat was, I had to beat it, and I had to beat it by a significant margin, which is what I did.
And the evidence behind that number are your systems, your business systems.
Correct, because, for example, if the average is 89.3, the occupancy, filling the beds, and my industry stat year on year is in excess of 90%, how do you do that? Well, you do that, it doesn't happen by magic. It happens by brilliant training, brilliant marketing, being completely innovative in what you're doing, and that's what I was. And so I won an industry award. I won a marketing award. You know, like every industry has its like Oscars ceremony. In the industry, I was quite high profile, and I won a marketing award because of what I was doing and my stats. So that was one stat. The second stat was that in the care industry, the critical stat is margin. What's your net profit? And at that time, the average net profit was roughly between 22 and 25% net. Okay. But again, the business that I was involved in was in excess of 30% year on year. So those are the 2 industry stats. I knew what the stats were, and I knew what I had to beat, and year on year I beat those stats. And you say, why did I sell for top dollar? Well, those are some of the reasons why. You set the business up, you know what the industry stat is, and then you set out a business, you create a business to beat those stats. And then people want to buy you because you're way above the norm. You're completely different.
I got you. So how many facilities did you build it up to?
At the peak, we had 12, and then when I sold, we got rid of 1 or 2, and there was 10. And then I also had a further 2 centres as well in my own right. But in the group, we had 12 at the peak.
Were there other centers that had that many, but just not high-end?
Yes, absolutely. No, in relative terms, we were small. We were a small player. Say the top 10 players, you know, massive companies, they had thousands and thousands of beds. So, you know, in relative terms, we had 350, 400 beds. So we were still a really quite small player. We were not a major player in the marketplace in terms of someone who had 3,000 or 5,000 beds. We were just a relatively small, what I call regional player.
But you had in your mind a business sold before you started it.
Completely.
Did you have an idea who was going to buy it? You knew a big one was going to buy it.
I knew either a big one was going to buy it or someone bigger than myself. If you've got a home with 300 beds, then someone with either 1,000 beds or 3,000 beds or 5,000 beds will be interested in buying you.
So at what point did you know it's time to sell, and the why at that point?
I knew it was time to sell because I gave myself a time frame, and so I built it up over about 6 or 7 years, and then I saw the market was beginning to what I call peak in terms of timing, and so at that point I then thought, right, I've given it my all, I've given it like 7 or 8 years. The numbers in terms of the valuations are coming good, and I think the market, the industry is beginning to turn around, and it's actually beginning to peak.
What was happening in the industry that made you believe that?
I kept a very, very close eye on valuations, and valuations were starting to rise. I knew people were coming into the industry and were buying very good prices, and people were acquiring good prices. I was closely watching the industry, what was going on. I was networking a lot. I had reasonably high profile, and so I knew what was going on. And also, from my own personal point of view, I'd given it my all, and I also wanted to move on. I realized then I'd done well, and I wanted to move to other businesses and do something else where I didn't have the sense of responsibility. It's a serious business, looking after elderly people, and I'd had a good run, and I was happy to bow out with my name intact. And also, I've been working very, very hard, and I'd had a young family, and there was personal reasons why I thought, yes, I could stay in the industry for another 5 years and probably double the value and double the group size, but I thought, no, I'm happy to bow out and spend more time with my family that was still young enough, and also do something else without the responsibility of 400 staff. There were personal reasons, but also there was other reasons in terms of I was watching the values very, very carefully.
So for others who have a business and they want to sell, what's the first thing you did to prepare for that sale? Was it getting it appraised?
Yeah, I got a valuation done. And as I said, as you see, I didn't get a small broker in or a small-time consultant in. Well, I chose to get in the best. So I got in Deloitte to value the business. Deloitte Touche, in the world, they're in the top 4 management and accountancy firm in the world. So,
and their job is to come back to you and say, this is what you should sell your business for.
This is what your business is worth, exactly.
How long did it take them to evaluate it?
Not long. I was prepared anyway. We had the information. So, I don't know, a couple of meetings, a bit of the information. It doesn't take long for them to appraise a business if it's organized.
So let's say you've got business people listening to this, and they want to get the value on their business. You talked about those 2 numbers.
The 2 critical numbers in the industry I was involved were what's known as occupancy rates, where you're filling your bed, and the average was 89%, and mine were in excess of 97%. And then the second number was what's your margins, what profits are you making, and the industry average was between 22 and 25. And year on year, we were in excess of 30. So applying it to any other business, whether it's the retail business, whether it's professional practice, whether it's a manufacturing centre, it doesn't really matter what the business is. In any industry, in any sector, there's normally 2, sometimes 3, or even 4. But normally there's only 2 or 3 numbers which are critical. And so the key point is, A, you've got to know what those numbers are. And then the second thing, if you want to sell, and you want to sell for the most amount of money, and being really in the elusive 1% who sell for the most amount of money, you've got to beat those numbers. And you've got to not just beat those numbers for 1 year, you've got to show a consistent track record of beating those numbers. So that's the advice. And so when it comes to you to exit, when it comes time to sell in whatever time frame it is, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, you've established that. You don't say, right, today I'm going to sell my business. My numbers are these. It's already pre-planned. It's already worked out. It's already organized.
So back to your business. So if you were average in the industry, it would have sold for X. But because those numbers were high and you're above average, it sold for X. What did that mean for you money-wise?
It meant a significant amount of money. Let me give you a clear example. Not in that business, but one of the other businesses that I sold. Let's keep it very, very simple. One of the other businesses that I had was making £100,000, so call it $200,000. And in the industry, the norm, it would have sold for $200,000 on a multiple of 4. So that would have sold for $200,000 times 4. It should have sold for $800,000.
What kind of business was it?
It was another assisted living centre. It was a different one that I had. Okay. I sold that business I sold that on a factor of 10.5. So I sold that business for English 1.1. So in US, I sold it for 2.2. So you've got a business theoretically that should be valued at 800,000. That's the norm. And yet I sold that business for 2.2. That's just under 300% return.
And that was because of your margins and was it a high-end place too?
No, it was exactly because I had systems, I had great occupancy, I had great profit, I had well-trained staff. Again, I set it up right at the beginning. I had that business, again, about 8-9 years I had that. But year on year, my margins were good, my staffing was good, my occupancy was good, everything was good. And so, in simple terms, you've got average business sells for $800,000, better business sold for $2.2 million. And that's the difference. So, in financial terms, that's what it means. It means a lot more money.
Give me some key components on what makes a business attractive to a buyer.
As I said, we talked about it. The first thing is, what are the numbers? And are your numbers in excess of the industry? So we've covered that. We touched on this at the beginning. The second thing is it mustn't be reliant on you. So you must have a team of people. The more people, the better. But even if it's at least one person, you've got to have people under you. You've got to have a manager or management team under you. So it's not reliant on you. So that's really an important point. The third point, which we've not talked about, is you need to have a business where the systems, often businesses are run in an ad hoc way, in a kind of periodic way, or in a whimsical way even. But for a business to be worth a significant amount of money, you've got to have business systems. Let me give you an example. We had a business where there was an operations manual, and the operations manual was, I don't know, about 400 or 500 pages. So it covered, all the different topics. Section on finance, how we collected money, and internal operations. There was a whole section on marketing, about what we did to make sure we filled the beds. There was a section on operations in terms of the care delivery, what we did in terms of the care. So there's all different sections, and that's all systematized, and it's all written down. And so the critical point to remember is that the greater the detail, the greater the layering of the systems, the greater the value to the business. So that's another key component of why people will pay top dollar for businesses. Another kind of important, it wasn't relevant for my industry, but another really important point to consider is a buyer doesn't want to feel exposed. So if your business is reliant on kind of one or two clients, then that's really, really bad news, because although you may have good relationships and, you're contributing in terms of revenues and profits and stuff, but you could fall out with those people. And so that will make a buyer extremely nervous. I'm not saying they wouldn't buy the business, but they certainly won't pay maximum price, top dollar for that. That wasn't particularly relevant for my industry, but sometimes I see other businesses where people are too reliant on one or two or three clients, three customers, that they represent significant amounts of revenues and profits, and that would make a buyer very, very, very nervous. So those are some of the other factors which sellers, buyers need to consider.
What's some of the industry statistics on businesses?
The actual amazing statistic, my research showed that the 75% of businesses that go to the market that are either listed or put up for sale don't sell. It's just frightening. So there's 25% only that will actually manage to sell. And of that 25% who actually manage to sell, the likelihood is only 1%, so the 1 in 100 will actually only sell for a price that they're actually happy with, what I call maximum price. So the numbers are not really great. They're quite dispiriting, really. If you think about all the hard work that people put into their businesses, and when it comes for them to sell, often it's their retirement situation, it's their pension. If they're not prepared and they're not organized, then, their pension completely disappears, and they have to continue working the business.
How were you able to sell your business? Once you got the evaluation, take me back to, you've got that number, you know what it's valued at. What steps did you...
Well, there's different ways of selling it, aren't there?
How do most people sell? They just list it with a business broker?
Yes, that's right. And again, you need to think carefully about that, because I'm not saying you shouldn't use a list broker. Often you should use a third party, but there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of businesses out there in the marketplace, and so you've got to find a way of differentiating your business You've got to stand out basically from the clutter, and that's difficult to do. And again, it goes back to the things that we've spoken about earlier, how you differentiate yourself from the clutter. You've got to make your offering, your business, extremely attractive in terms of what is being laid out before a prospective buyer.
Do business brokers on a whole know what they're doing, or are many of them just inexperienced?
You see, the problem is the only way business brokers get paid is if they sell it, okay? So their agenda is to sell the business. Their agenda isn't necessarily the same agenda as the seller. Yes, the seller wants to sell, but he wants to sell for the maximum price, whereas often the agenda of the broker is he wants to sell, not necessarily at the maximum price. If it's sat around, he isn't earning commission, so there's often a conflict between what the broker wants and what the actual seller wants, and that can cause a bit of tension sometimes.
Are there better ways to sell, like a smaller business?
Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't use brokers.
What's another avenue? What's another way to
Another
sell?
way of approaching it is selling it yourself. Let me give you a couple of ideas. For example, if you've got a business and you're thinking of selling it, yes, it's still worthwhile to speak to some brokers and get some valuations done, but you may want to try and consider selling it yourself. And so the first thing that I would urge you to do is create kind of a potential hit list of people who you think may be interested in your business. And so most buyers think, oh, well, I think maybe one or maybe two people might be interested in my business. It may be one of the competitors. But often if you start to think in a more lateral way, in a bit more of a strategic way, you can find and think about other ways and other potential buyers. So the first kind of practical piece of advice I would always give people is that they should read the industry magazines. Often people neglect and are too busy running the business and doing other things, and they don't read. In every industry, there's always 2 or 3 magazines. And in those magazines, there's a wealth of information about people, about companies that are doing very well. That companies are buying other companies, companies have acquired other companies. And so you need to be looking and watching out for those companies. And maybe if your business is positioned right, then sometimes it's even worth thinking about, approaching them. As I said, sometimes it's best to use a third party, but on other occasions you can approach them direct. And so the trade press, the trade magazines, the periodicals, the journals, there's a wealth of information in there. The other thing, kind of another idea, is obviously talk to your vendors. Your vendors are supplying other people in the industry, and they know who's buying and who's selling and who's doing well and who's doing badly. And so they're also a really good source of information. The other kind of 2 sources of information are obviously your own networking, and another source of information is obviously each industry has its own trade shows, and so you need to be going to there and finding out what's going on. One other idea is that if you think also about someone who's not from your industry but from someone outside, you need to think about who else would be interested in my kind of client base, customer base and stuff like that. Someone who's not in your industry but who has a business in a complementary industry. So they may be looking to get into your industry, or they may use that customer base as another line of additional revenue. So there's a range of different kind of, if you think about it in a slightly different ways, there's not just one buyer, there's a range of different buyers, and there's all different ways to strategize and do some research of how you can create your own kind of hit list.
Take me back to your business. Once you had the evaluation, what did you do to sell?
I'll give you one instance. The business that I sold for the 2.2 million, again, I had it valued, and again, it was valued close to that figure. And in that case, I did use a broker. I wanted to use a broker. Although I had a network of people, I chose a broker. If you are using a broker, you need to do, obviously, due diligence and do some research. And so I knew these brokers, and I knew they specialized in selling that particular business, specialized in the assisted living centre. And I knew those people. So what I did was that I gave them all the information. Normally a broker would prepare what's known as a sales memorandum, the sales particulars, but I prepared it instead of the broker because I wanted to really make sure the key points about the business were really highlighted in a very careful and a very appealing way. So I wrote the sales particulars and just made sure that the key points were made and it was attractive and it would attract interest, basically. That's what I did. And then what I did was I then spoke to the broker and I said, look, give me a list of the people who you think would be interested in this business. So they came back to me with a list of, I think it was 20 names who might be interested. So I said, right, approach those 20 people just informally at this point in time and just see if there's interest. And so he approached those, I think it was 20 people. And I think it was about half said they were interested. And there was either 10 or 12 were interested in knowing more. So I got the broker then to get those 10, 12 people to sign what's called a non-disclosure agreement, which just protects any seller in terms of confidentiality, in terms of information being provided. So they signed that information and signed the agreement, and then the sales pack was then sent to them. And then after that, I gave the broker, I said, if there's going to be any viewings, I want to do the viewings on 2 days only. So I've got a 2-hour slot on a Thursday and a 2-hour slot on a Friday. And we're going to just restrict it to those 2 days, and either they can see it or they can't. I was setting very, very clear parameters. I was, in effect, controlling the process.
What was your strategy for that?
Create urgency in terms, I'm serious. If you want to see it, these are the only 2 days in which you can see it. You can't see it any other time because the following day it's going to go.
You want multiple people in the viewings?
No, separate viewings.
Separate viewings, each person individual.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, yeah. But I wanted to create urgency and people know that there were people were going to see on those 2 days.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, again, it's very unique in how I controlled the process. Of the 12 people, I got, I think it was either 5 or 6 viewings. I got roughly half of them viewed on those 2 days.
How long did a viewing take?
It would take roughly about an hour.
And you'd walk them through the facility?
Yeah, walk them through the facilities, and they'd had information, and then I would answer whatever questions they wanted to ask. I would be free and open and give them as much information.
What was the asking price on the paperwork?
The asking price was, I think it was 1.25.
Had all the people been qualified financially before the viewing?
Yeah.
And did any of them own other care facilities?
That was a precondition. I pre-qualified them. They had to have owned at least one centre beforehand.
Okay, good. So you had qualified people, and they're going to compare what they've done to what you've done.
Exactly. So we've got, I think it's 5 or 6 people around over the 2 days, and then, not surprisingly, that generated 2 people who were interested, and so they put in offers not near the asking price, and so then we started to play one against the other, and again we set deadlines on that. I said neither of them were accepted, so I gave them 7 days to put their best offer in, basically, and so again, create the urgency. They knew each other were competing, and you know, it was a good home, so that's one of the reasons why we got good margins, and then they both put offers in, and then I chose the one that put the best offer in. And then we agreed a timetable to do the deal, and the deal was done.
Very good. Now, that was for a smaller one. What about the big one you sold for, what, 30-something million?
No, the other one, what we did was we had the valuation done. Remember, on that one, I had 2 investors.
Right.
So I said to the investors, look, this is the valuation. This is what Deloitte say it's worth. I want out. Do you want out with me? Can we all sell together and make some money and do okay? And what happened was on that deal, the investor said, fine, let's go ahead, and if you hit this number, we'll come out with you. I got that number from a prospective buyer, and the investor got cold feet and he wanted to stay in. So I knew I could get the number. It was valued by Deloitte. We knew we could get those numbers, but he wanted to stay in. So what happened then? I said to the investor, I said, look, these are the numbers. We've got the Deloitte. We know the buyer. So if you want to stay in, you've got to pay me out.
So he bought you out?
They bought me out.
So you got out of it, and they're still in the business?
No, they sold. I spoke to them. I'm still friendly with them, and I saw them 3 weeks ago, and they just sold.
Did they get around the same numbers, or did they get more?
They were very coy.
They were very coy?
They never told me what numbers they got.
Okay. No hard feelings with you?
No, not at all. I was happy. I got out. I did well, and it was fine. You know, we were still on good terms. In that situation, once I knew they wanted to stay in, I brought in a new CEO, or we call it managing director, but a new CEO, and I brought someone in for them, and I trained them up, and so they didn't feel they were exposed. I had a team of people anyway, but I brought in a new person.
For more exclusive interviews on business, marketing, advertising, and copywriting, go to Michael Senoff's hardtofindseminars.com. So how much does marketing come into play? I mean, really, are we talking about better marketing, great marketing, systems, and that's where you're going to get your numbers?
Yeah, it's about a number of things. As you said, it's about systems, and systems could mean in terms of all different facets of the business. in terms of how the operations work as well as the marketing. But critically, and you use the word marketing, you see, often it's about profits. It's about what profits is the business making. And as you know, there's only three ways to increase the profits and therefore increase the value of the business. And the first is obviously getting new customers, new clients, new patients. The second is increasing the frequency of the transaction, so they're buying more often. And the third is not only they're buying more often, but they're spending more money, increasing the transaction size. And so really, on the marketing side, it's analyzing and developing each of those three strands, each of those three strategies, devoting specific strategies to each particular one of those three elements, and really putting in systems in each particular way. So all the time you're layering the marketing, you're doing all different strategies on whether it's on new business. You're not just applying direct mail, you're doing telemarketing, you're doing promotional stuff, you're being educator, you're doing all different aspects. And similarly, if you're on the frequency, you're communicating with people, you're doing newsletters. So there's all different aspects all the time. You can't just focus on one aspect of the business. It's layering all the different aspects of your business. And that will obviously affect your bottom line, your profits, and that ultimately will affect the value of the business.
Can you describe the difference between income and equity?
Yeah, massive difference. Most people, when they're in the shower in the morning, they think about income. They think about how they're going to generate revenue that day, that week, that month, to pay themselves and to pay their staff. And that's fine, and that's income. And most business owners just think about income. What are they doing today, tomorrow, the next week? But what they really should be thinking about, and what completely differentiates a good businessman and a great businessman, is they should always be thinking not only about income, but also about equity. You see, you can carry on thinking about income, but at the end of the day, whether it's in 1 year, whether it's in 3 years, whether it's in 5 years, there will be a time when you want to sell your business, and there will be hopefully a big payday if it's been structured right. And so all the time they need to be thinking about how they can generate that big payday. So they need to be thinking about who's going to buy my business in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Why would they buy my business? What differentiates my business from the business down the road? So these are really critical things that need to have equal prominence, not only when they're in the shower thinking about income, but all the time they should be thinking about equity as well. And most business owners just don't think about that.
So when should a business owner start thinking about selling his business?
They should think about it right at the very beginning. Like I said at the beginning, I talk about begin with the end in mind. Stephen Covey talks about begin with the end in mind in his 7 traits of successful people. I think it's chapter 1 or the first successful trait he talks about is begin with the end in mind. He talks about it in a personal development kind of way, but I talk about it in a business way. 9 years ago, I began with the end in mind. I wrote down how many centers I would have. I wrote down the staffing. I wrote down the numbers. I wrote down my market positioning. I wrote down who I was going to sell to. I wrote down the time frame. I wrote down my numbers. So I would urge all business owners to begin with the end in mind. So even if they're not starting a business today, then they should write down today what their business is going to look like in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whenever they want to sell their business. But they've got to map out exactly how it's going to look. Michael Gerber in the E-Myth talks about the picture of the business when it's being done. Well, he's right. You've got to picture that business when it's done. You've got to figure it out at the beginning what it's going to be like when it's finished. And so the ideal time is right at the beginning of the journey. But if business owners don't do that, then wherever they are in their business cycle, so today, whereas the business has been going for 2 or 3 years and, they want to retire in 3 or 4 years, they need to write down what the business is going to look like, what the revenues are, what the staffings are, what profits they're making, and also they need to start figuring out who's going to buy the business and why. Why would they buy that business? So they need to start figuring out those questions now, not, right, well, I'm 54 now, I want to retire when I'm 55, and I think now I've got to figure out how I'm going to sell. It's too late then, so you've got to figure it out as early as possible.
So looking at this dreadful statistic, 75 never sell, and only a very small percentage get what the owners want. Working with you, you're providing coaching and consulting services, and if I hire you to help me structure my business in a way that, even with these statistics, if I'm doing everything right and I've got the margins and the profits and my numbers are better than industry average, do you think there's a good chance of me getting my top dollar or more than what the industry would get, even with these dismal numbers?
Yes, absolutely. If you position positioned your business you do have management, you do have systems, your numbers are higher than the industry average, then yes, you're not reliant on one or two customers. If you're doing those things, then A, you'll be in the 25% who actually sell. That's the first point. And B, you're doing a lot of really pretty cool stuff, and so you're going to be pretty close to be getting in the 1% who are achieving a price they're happy with, achieving the maximum price. But most business owners just aren't there. They're struggling, they're not sure. You don't know what you don't know, and they don't know certain things, and they have tremendous anxieties about the whole process. And that's obviously where I come in to ease the anxieties and show them how, they've been working so hard in their business. And at one level they've been in good money, but, well, great, but there is a payday and a big payday, and don't let all the hard work just disappear.
I know you're working with a high-end client. Who should not contact you if they wanted help increasing the value and selling their business at top dollar? Who do you not want to work with, and who should not even bother contacting you?
Dreamers.
What's a dreamer?
I don't want to work with dreamers, and I don't want to work with people who are not open and not flexible. If they're very narrow in their thinking, if they think they know it all, then there's absolutely no point in me even talking to them.
Okay.
Anyone else who is a doer and is sufficiently flexible to know that there is a possibility of learning something from someone else, then I'm happy to talk to those type of guys.
And are there any types of businesses that you'd rather work with, manufacturing, services, or all across the board?
No, it's across the board. I'm working on the coaching side with all different, whether it's a speaking business, an information business. I've just recently spoke to a bunch of dentists. I'm comfortable, and my background is in the service environment. But I'm being a financier, though, in all different environments, so I understand different work environments. And so there are business at the end of the day. It's about profit systems, and that's applicable to all businesses.
You have a DVD that you offer up on your website. If someone were to invest in that, is this going to give someone a good idea what you're all about, and what can I expect to learn on that?
Yes, it gives you good information about some of the topics we've been talking about this evening. So it gives you good information about the different strategies, different objectives, talks about profit, talks about negotiations, talks about different levels of timing. It goes into a lot more detail. It's a great starting point in terms of giving you valuable information and giving you plenty of ideas, plenty of things to think about, which you can start to kind of apply to your own business and your own situation.
Now, your high-end one-on-one coaching, what can a client expect from you?
Well, there's different levels, really. First of all, there's what I call a 3-month program, where the client is quite sophisticated, he's pretty close and ready to sell, and he just needs a bit of what I call tweaking. And so it's very intensive over a 3-month period where we analyze his business. We do basically a SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and he's ready to go to the market. I put my buyer's hat on and I really analyze in great detail the business, and particularly focusing not necessarily on the strengths, but really focusing on the weaknesses. And so we can really address those weaknesses and either address them and do something about them, or address them in terms of creating a story, so that when we go to the market, there's a story and the gap is plugged up.
Is the client working with you only specifically?
One-on-one.
One-on-one.
One-on-one. It's over a 3-month. It's coaching one-on-one. You hit the phones one-on-one over a 3-month period.
You get it sold.
We get it ready to sell. We get it in a position, so we've got rid of all the weaknesses, and we've developed and highlighted the strengths, and we've got everything ready to go. So that's where a business feels that they are in a strong position, but they just need someone objective to really analyze it before they actually go to the marketplace and really tighten up their procedures and tighten up what their offering is. That's the first thing. The second thing is I also offer 2 one-year programs where they are more geared to people who are thinking about selling and really need to have a greater timeline. So they're thinking about it and they want to prepare, and they want to do it really from ground zero, and they really want to do it, I'm not saying the correct way, but in a strategic way, and they want to really understand the process, and so we go through the process in detail. And again, we analyze where the business is currently, and then we do a SWOT analysis on it, and then we really develop in considerable detail where the strengths are, and we really look to build upon those strengths, and we find pretty quickly the other strengths and other unexploited opportunities, so we can really layer those strengths and bring in new strengths. And then, of course, we also have greater time to take the weaknesses of the business. Every business has weaknesses, so we've got greater time over that year to actually strategize and try and implement and try and deal with those weaknesses, really spend time plugging them up. And then, again, we really analyze the opportunities that are open not only to the person running the business, but one thing that people forget is when you sell a business, you've always got to try and sell on a high, but you've also got to sell and show the buyer that there is more money to be made. So if you're selling a business for $5 million, you've also got to show the buyer that in 3 to 5 years' time, he can sell for $10 million. So you've got to leave stuff there for the buyer to do. So we analyze the opportunities for any prospective buyer. And finally, on the threats, we just make sure kind of the external environment, government legislation and things in the economy, we just make sure that the business is protected as much as it can be in terms of any external factors. I offer 2 programs. Either we do it once a week over a year or once every 2 weeks. And so, again, it's done one-on-one.
But by the phone, right?
Yes, done by the phone. Except for that program, the one-on-one, the very high end, I would go out to the client and spend the day with the client right at the very beginning just to set the ball rolling.
What happens if, let's say, a client approaches you and he's got a business that's doing okay, mediocre, let's say a little bit below or average for the industry, and they've been in business for, let's say, 10 years, and then you come along, you work with them for a year, you get his numbers up, you get the margins up and stuff, but when it's time to sell and you get an evaluation done, aren't they looking at averages for the last 3 to 5 years? And if you've got a big jump on the last year, how does that affect it when you average it in?
It's a good question, that. And the answer to the question is, look, if you've got numbers year on year, you've got 3 years trading history, and each year your revenues go up and your profits go up, and the curve is still rising, obviously that's ideal. But if you've got numbers where you've got 2 years where the numbers either plateau or they're okay, and then you've got a final set of numbers which show an increase, then of course the chances are, first of all, you're selling at a higher number than you would if there were 3 years at the same numbers, but obviously you're not necessarily going to get as much as if you had 3 years rising figures. But again, it's how you package and how you present that information to a prospective buyer. And one with very careful and very clever presentation skills, you could still achieve a very good number. Even if it wasn't the full 3 years, you only had 1 year jump, they at least could see 1 year's jump. And like I spoke about earlier on, you could then present to them, then if you did these 3 things, those numbers will continue to increase, and your business today is worth $5 million, but over the next 3 years, if you did these next 5 steps, then the business will be worth $8 million or $9 million or whatever. And so it's how you present the package to the prospective buyer. It's critical.
All right, let me ask you, so when you're selling, and just go with me on this, let's say I'm interested in your business, it's a $10 million business. I mean, I would assume, or maybe you have a strategy that when you're selling your business and you're going for your exit strategy, you're selling people who are cashed up with the money, rather than someone who doesn't have the money and they're going to have to take the numbers to the bank, and the bank's going to look at it and say, well, this business is only worth this, I can loan you this on it. You being a financer, do these marketing assets carry any weight for getting the money?
It's about cash flow. There's 2 things banks look at. The first thing they look at is freehold and the land values and stuff like that. The other thing that banks look at is strong cash flows. If there's strong cash flows, strong revenues and strong cash flows and profits, then, obviously there are other factors in terms of the individual or the management team. There's a whole set of variables why the bank will invest or they won't invest. And again, and this comes back to some of the things that I spoke about earlier on, is if they can see that the business has strong cash flows, strong profits, there's a clear differentiation, there's a reasonable management team, there is systems, then a bank obviously is going to look at that business in an extremely positive way, and they will, I don't know what percentage, it will vary, but they will certainly lend on it. Whereas if the business is reliant exclusively on the owner, there's very little poor systems, it's relying on 1 or 2 customers, and clearly in that situation it's going to be very, very difficult to get financing. So it depends upon A, the quality of the individual or the company or the management team buying the business, and B, it's the quality of the business that's being bought.
When you meet with potential clients who have businesses and they want to sell, let's say I wanted to sell my business, and I understand you'll do a consultation with someone who's got a legitimate business and they're interested in possibly selling it. What information do you need from them to kind of get an evaluation? You need to spend time on the phone with them?
Yeah, initially I would just spend half an hour or chat with them on the phone. And then what I would do is then I would send them a number of forms to fill in, which would give me an idea of where their business was, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats in their business. And it would give me really a good idea of what their business is worth and where the upside was, and how much work was going to be involved in moving the business on from 5 mil to 6 mil, or from 1 mil to 2 mil, or whatever the numbers were.
For more interviews like this, go to hardtofindseminars.com.